Hello, Biblionauts, and here we are with another installment of the Dialectic of Enlightenment. Um, I'm gonna go really quickly through this chapter. We have today Juliet, or Enlightenment and Morality, if I'm not wrong, or Enlightenment and Morality, yes, page 81. And there's two reasons why I wanna go as fast as possible on this chapter. One is that the culture industry is awaiting for us, which is probably the most commented chapter of this book by far, and just one of the most commented chapters of philosophy books in the history of philosophy, or in the 20th century at least. So, yeah, I kind of want to get it over with. The other reason is because this chapter painfully reminds me of way too many friends of mine that study philosophy like I do, but they don't read philosophy like I do, because at some point they go to like some conclusion that to them felt like a revelation that was their own, which is there is no objective morality, so we are all sort of like free to live or free to go or something like that, you know. Normally that comes from watching a YouTube video where someone said that God is dead, and then they derive everything. You're like, God is dead, therefore there's no one to hold us accountable. That whole sort of generally very surface and very flat argument is laid here in a much deeper way. Of course, this is the book, not the guy that normally would tell you that. No dubros, but still, sort of like it has some reminiscences of that kind of argument. I don't know if I agree with the overarching conclusion of this, which is that and this conclusion is kind of fundamental for the whole argument of the book. So we'll see where we end up when we finish. But I'll just gonna go through like the basics of what I understood from this chapter that I read a bit fast, because I wanna finish this read along soon enough so that I can maybe start another one before the end of the year, and because I am really looking forward to reading the culture industry chapter. So yeah, without further ado, let's look at the first page, and you can already see from the first page that these guys have something to say about Kant. Kant, Nietzsche, and Sade are gonna be interlinked here. You might wonder how they are interlinked. The answer to that is that Kant's defense of the Enlightenment is connected in some ways to sort of like the liberation that the Marquis de Sade defended, also with sort of like the Nietzschean claims of like will to power and sort of like brutality as a way of being, as the intrinsic nature of human, and eventually with fascism, which is the final conclusion of this book, wants to be that sort of like enlightenment leads to fascism. So, looking at the first paragraph, we have already sort of comment on Kant and on Kant's reasoning. It says enlightenment, according to Kant, is man's emergence from his self-incurred immaturity. Immaturity is the ability to use one's own understanding without the guidance of another person. Understanding without the guidance of another person, they repeat, is understanding guided by reason. This means no more than that by virtue of its own consistency, it organizes the individual data of cognition into a system. So the difference between normal cognition and reason would be that reason is systematized. And that is the new guide of humans during the Enlightenment, as opposed to someone else, some other entity, or in the case of this passage, some other person. That is going to be a problem, as we are about to see, because although Kant, in his essay on the what is enlightenment, was concerned with he defended the Enlightenment because he saw it as the freeing of man from tutelage, from his self-imposed tutelage, from the tutelage of like deities or higher entities of any kind, and therefore some kind of like liberation that came with that. Adorno and Horkheimer are going to defend that tutelage is kind of necessary, that without that tutelage chaos will reign, and with it barbarism. And here I wrote, the enlightened emancipation is no more than the systematization of reason or knowledge, which is basically what I just said. Now, of course, there is a lot more going on in these pages. I'm just focusing on the argument that makes more sense within the book in order to get to the next chapter. But there's so much more that you could take from this than what I'm taking. So please, if you are reading along with me and you saw something else that I'm not commenting in this video, just let me know in the comments. We can talk about it down there. I can even make a video, if an extra video on that specific topic, if there is something that interests you. In the next chapter, I'm going to read another long passage just to get a bit of an outline of this idea of enlightenment and subjectivity. Up here it says, knowledge consists on subsumption or under principles. Subsumption, again, is another way of saying the same thing that we said before. Now, the understanding impresses the intelligibility of the matter which subjective judgment discovers there on it as objective quality before it enters into the ego. Without such a schematism, in short, without intellectual perception, no impression would harmonize with a concept and no category with an example. And the unity of thought, let alone system, toward which everything is directed, would not prevail. To produce this unity is the conscious task of science. If all empirical laws are only special determinations of the pure laws of the understanding, research must always ensure that the principles are always properly linked with factual judgments. This occurrence of nature with our cognitive faculty as in a priori assumption of judgment, it is the guideline for organized experience. So again, the enlightenment at the end of the day is just trying to organize experience into a systematic whole, into something that is therefore repeatable. The system must be kept in harmony with nature. In the next page, halfway through, it continues to talk about the system the Enlightenment has in mind is the form of knowledge which copes most proficiently with the facts and supports the individual most effectively in the mastery of nature. Again, this chapter goes back to when we read the concept of enlightenment. The mastery of nature is all over the premises of the Enlightenment. Its principles are the principles of self-preservation, once again, self-preservation, as at the end of the day, the Enlightenment, and this is going to be the conclusion of the chapter and also one of the conclusions of the book, is that it's nothing more than the moving, the sort of like inner migration of social consciousness into self-preservation as a priority, as opposed to any other kind of project. The difficulties in the concept of reason, caused by the fact that its subjects, the possessors of that very reason, contradict one another, are concealed by the apparent clarity of the judgments of the Enlightenment. In the critique of pure reason, however, they are expressed in the unclear relation of transcendental to the empirical ego and in other unresolved contradictions. Okay, here they just keep talking about the same, just sort of like outlining more of the argument. I'm not going to keep reading because this is not a read aloud, this is a read aloud. So, further down in the page talks about like the attempt to universalization of this as an utopia, which then they will explain why it is not an utopia, how like sensory material becomes material subjugation, how being is apprehended under the aspect of manufacture and administration. Basically, all the implications of systematization are sort of like outlined in these pages. Then we get to the most interesting paragraph in page 85, and I have to say I had some help with this paragraph. I found a cool podcast. I will link it in the description of this video, where they were sort of like breaking down this paragraph, and yeah, I recommend you check it out because the people that are doing that podcast are at least one of them is an academic and he's probably an expert on this, or at least way more well read on Adorno than I am. So the moral teachings of the Enlightenment bear witness to a hopeless attempt to replace enfeebled religion with some reason for persisting in society when interest is absent. And now we get at the problem with Kantian optimism, the root of Kantian optimism, and according to which moral behavior is rational even if the mean and wretched would prevail, is actually an expression of horror and the thought of reversion to barbarism. Okay, I'm just gonna keep reading, but basically the point with Kantian optimism, the problem with him is that he believes that reason can be autonomous without falling under the blindness of fascism. That is the main problem with Kantian optimism and with the project of the Enlightenment as a whole. So if so, Kant one of the according to Kant, further down, in the face of scientific reason, moral forces are no less neutral impulses and modes of behavior than the immoral forces into which they suddenly change when directed not to that hidden possibility but to reconciliation with power. Enlightenment expels the distinction from the theory. It treats emotion, it's all Latin, so I'm not going to read it, liberated from the control of the same class which tied the 19th century businessman to Kantian respect and mutual love. Fascism, which is its iron discipline, saves its subject peoples the trouble of moral feelings. No longer needs to uphold any disciplines. In contradistinction to the categorical imperative, and all the more in accordance with pure reason, it treats men as things. There you go. That's all. That's basically all we need to know for this chapter. Page 86 on my edition of Verso books. I wrote here a note, so I'm just it's an answer to the previous note I wrote. So like the optimism of Kant is that he believes that sort of like it's that this kind of reason, enlightened reason, can be made autonomous from everything without falling into fascism, basically. The question to that would be how is that possible? In what way does he believe that? And this argument basically is these paragraphs in this page basically are an outline on how Kant said that the Enlightenment was the liberation of man fueled by scientific reason. But in defending this, my calligraphy is horrible, so I'm I'm struggling to read it. He removed the authority of morals. Human societies need that external force that is above reason. Without it, we revert into barbarism, to the state of basically the Marquis de Sade. So in the moment that you remove those external forces, as we talk about at the beginning, we completely lose the sense of accountability toward our own actions. And then, if you read I don't remember the translate. I don't know how it's the title in English, but the very famous, very brutal Marquis de Sade book. You can have an example of what a truly enlightened man could look like in Adorno's and Horkheimer perspective, because it's a truly emancipated person from the bounds of morality. In the next page, thinking becomes an organic medium, pure and simple, and reverts to nature. What this means is that it reverts to its most basic, most animalistic, most bestial drives. One of the problems I have with the book is that with this chapter, is that there is a presumption that reverting into our natural drives is necessarily reverting into barbarism. I don't agree with that. I don't think that is correct. I think that some of the moral structures that the Enlightenment allegedly destroys are actually inherent, intrinsic to us, and not they didn't come before or after. I think it's Bruno Latour who said, yeah, I think it was Bruno Latour who they asked him like, so why do we have laws? He was giving a class, a lecture. Why do we have laws? And he says because we had guilt. So it is true, as like the Nietzschean claim that guilt is the birth of morality is true, but guilt is not a social construct. It is very much humane, and therefore there is some sort of moral structures that are inherent in our natures, and not only ours. I feel like I believe that other animals also have moralities of their own. Because of that, I don't think that the freeing of humanity from the social authorities, the behavioral authorities that make them accord to systematic organization, if they were to be removed, I don't need that they are necessary in order basically for an ethical life in society. That is my problem with this chapter. But I'll keep reading. Basically, while they will go on to say now they talk about sexuality, they go deeper into the Marquis de Sade. They see how, they also explore like here how like through enlightenment, and this is the part that I find very interesting. All the power of nature was reduced to mere indiscriminate resistance to the abstract power of the subject. In the moment, the enlightenment gives way to self-preservation as its fuel. The inevitable conclusion is that anything that is not that self-preservation, anything that is not the self, is at the mercy of the self, is either with it or against it, is in this case nature is seen as sort of like a resistance, something that it needs to be manipulated in order to bend to the self will, to the self's will. Furthermore, enjoyment becomes the object of manipulation until ultimately it is extinguished in fixed entertainments. So human relations become superficial again, because, and this is going back to the previous chapter, the concept of enlightenment, not the first chapter, in which we talked about consumer relations, about instrumental reason, about treating people as means and not as ends. That also relates to sexuality and like romantic relationships. In some ways, the Enlightenment has no use for love, as we understand it, as an unconditional sort of like connection between individuals, which means that it gets marginalized. Sexual intercourse in this regression into the barbaric becomes a mere exchange of pleasure. But again, is extracting surplus value from something that we see as a commodity, someone that we see as a commodity. And to finish, they just again emphasize on like that the only difference between Marquis de Sade and Nietzsche from Kant is that they were willing to accept that and they were honest about it. Kant wanted to maintain the categorical imperative just because, just like morality is there and we need to sort of follow it, but also let's destroy everything that sustains it. Inasmuch as the merciless doctrines proclaim the identity of domination and reason, they are more merciful than those of the moralistic lackeys of the bourgeois. Where do your greatest dangers lie? Was the question Nietzsche once posed himself, and he answered thus, in compassion. With his denial, he redeemed the unshakable confidence in man that is constantly betrayed by every form of assurance that seeks only to console. So there you go. Nietzsche's answer to himself is the same answer that by following the precepts of the Enlightenment, one would find at the end of it. And that's why fascism is the inevitable emergence of the project of the Enlightenment. I think we're going to leave it there. I know I went much faster on this one and I didn't go as deeply into the arguments, but that is because we have a killer coming. We have the culture industry. We have this chapter. So I'll see you next week probably for the culture industry, and I will probably have to break that one into a couple of videos potentially, because I mean I have high expectations for that chapter given the what I've heard about it. And that's it. I'll see you on the other side.